placed on the internet. The government panicked and said, you need to take these blueprints down immediately. Okay? You need to take these blueprints down right now. The person complied. All right? The question is, can the government police 3D printed guns in two ways? Number one, can they prevent people from transferring information about them? Thank you. And number two, can they prevent people from actually printing them? So I actually argue that both of these aspects are unconstitutional. Okay? So for starters, we're only talking about a handgun. All right. In District of Columbia v. Heller, a 2008 decision, the Supreme Court said the handgun, the quintessential gun, is a core Second Amendment right. Charlie will probably talk about other guns like AR-15s and otherwise. I'm only talking about handguns. That's all I'm talking about now. Okay.
Now, Counselor, don't presume something that's not in evidence.
Counselor, it's been admitted. Overruled. Anyway, I've never been a real lawyer. I only play one on TV. So let's talk about the handgun, okay? So in the case of District of Columbia versus Heller, the Supreme Court made a number of findings. So first it said that the Second Amendment right is an individual right, protects the right to keep and bear arms. And this is a right that's traced back since the time of the founding and before, okay? But the court placed certain limitations on that right. It said certain dangerous and unusual weapons are not provided. Also certain places, so-called sensitive places, there can be some sort of reasonable regulations, okay? So I'm not taking the position that the Second Amendment is absolute. All I'm talking about is a right to make your own gun as a pistol. So the Second Amendment was then extended or incorporated to the states in a case called McDonald v. City of Chicago. And that case said that even a state like California, which loves most types of liberty, has to respect the Second Amendment as well. Okay? So in this case, we have two components, designing it and printing it. The designing aspect of the gun is very communicative. It's almost expressive. The same way, if any of you are art students or whatever else, you can design a painting, you can design a blueprint, you can be an architect. And the actual schematics or designs of these guns, designs of these pieces of art will be protected. The same way that if you had a Photoshop program on your computer and you design some structure on Photoshop, it will be uncontrovertible, right? The government can't ban you from sharing information about that type of a gun, right? You cannot restrict information. Now you may say, Josh, what about the fact that this information is dangerous? Well, have you ever heard of the Anarchist Cookbook, right? This is a book that's on the shelves in many places. And if you open it up, it'll tell you, here's how you make a bomb and blow up people. It's a very dangerous book, but courts have consistently held the mere act that some piece of communication is dangerous doesn't count. And he said, but Josh, what happens if someone takes this information and uses it to cause a terrorist attack or shoots children, something very terrible? Well, you remember the Pentagon Papers cases. Remember this? The New York Times wanted to print information about troop movement in Vietnam. This was a very serious deal. People could have died because of this. And the Supreme Court, I think it was unanimous, said, print it. So the mere fact that information can be dangerous is not enough to ban it. You need something called imminence, right? So the case of Brandenburg versus Ohio, this was a guy at a Ku Klux Klan rally saying, we need to go to Washington, we need to storm Washington, we need to do all these horrible things. But it wasn't happening right away. And the Supreme Court said in that case, the mere fact that someone's advocating for something violent or dangerous doesn't give you the right to control it. It has to be imminent. So I think it's safe to say that putting a blueprint online for a gun that you could buy in the store illegally is not an imminent danger. It's not an imminent threat. So the blueprints themselves can't be banned. And there's some intricacies about this involving, arms control laws and everything else. I'll spare you those details. But as far as the First Amendment concerns, the government can't just ban you sharing information. And as far as the point we'll talk about later, at a certain point, the genie gets out of the bottle, so to speak. Because once you put something on the internet, it's gone forever, right? I'm sure you've all put something on Facebook like, damn, I should have done that, right? Once you put something online, it's gone. Gone, baby, gone. You're not getting it back. So the government's even efforts to try to police speech on the internet is not only scary, but futile. Okay? The second point I want to make is about the Second Amendment. And this requires some thinking outside the box, because the Supreme Court has not addressed the Second Amendment since Heller or McDonald. They've just ignored it. They've not taken a single case on the Second Amendment since Heller or McDonald. So I actually argue that the Second Amendment right has two components. You have the right to acquire a gun, and you have the right to make a gun. Okay, where do I get these things from? Well, if you can't acquire a gun, how are you supposed to exercise the right? Guns don't appear out of thin air. there has to be some protection of actually getting a gun from somewhere to acquire it, right? This can be regulated. I'm not saying it's an absolute right, but you have some sort of constitutional right to acquire a gun. And that has two parts, buying and selling. Someone has to give it to you, and someone has to receive it. I teach property also, and as you know, any gift has two elements, a giver and a receiver, okay? So you need to be able to get and receive different parts of guns to actually have a constitutional right that's meaningful. So there's nothing wrong with giving someone a gun. It can be regulated. Likewise, there's nothing wrong with transferring information about a gun. That's an even stronger right because the First and Second Amendments working in tandem as a hybrid right. Okay. Even more strongly, you have the right to make a gun. Now, this may surprise you, especially in California, but under federal law, there's nothing preventing you from making your own gun as long as you don't sell it. Nothing. You can go to Home Depot in Wilshire, 3 blocks away. I saw it. I passed by on the way here, made a note of it. You can go to Home Depot, buy some rubber tubing, okay, and a nail, and you can make a rifle. You take a shotgun shell, put in the tubing, jam it with a nail, you just made a gun. Please don't arrest me, DOJ. By the way, if you were to arrest me to prove my point that speaking about guns is a constitutional right, because I'd win. I get a 1983 judgment against them and attorney's fees. So you can go to Home Depot 5 minutes away, buy rubber tubing and a nail, and you can make a gun. Right? There's no doubt about that. And it's not regulated, okay? Long-standing tradition in America that you can make your own guns. Go watch a John Adams miniseries. You'll see John Adams and Abigail Adams pouring muskets and making their own balls. So the fact that you can make your guns out of muskets and rubber tubing, it's not too much of a stretch for me to be able to make your gun out of a 3D printer. In fact, it's a lot safer. In fact, there's actually arguments being made that people with disabilities who can't use a gun in a certain fashion may want to have a customized 3D gun. Maybe their arms aren't as functional as otherwise. They can make certain guns to use other appendages, maybe a foot to pull the trigger. Anyway, my point is you have a right to acquire a gun, you have the right to sell a gun, you also have the right to make a gun. All these things can be regulated, but they cannot be banned. They can't just be outright eliminated, which is what the government has done. This is a weird form of censorship. And I'll give you another example. So everyone saw last week that a drone crashed onto the White House lawn. Everyone saw this? Okay. So the drone manufacturers, the Chinese company, saying, you know what? We're going to build in a block that says you cannot fly this within the District of Columbia. A 15-mile radius from the District of Columbia, you can't fly a drone anywhere. This should scare you. Let me tell you why. Comcast and other companies said, you know what? We're going to install filters on our internet stuff. And if you download anything not supposed to, we'll cut you off. We're going to be seeing a lot more as technology becomes more pervasive. The government saying, you can't do this preemptively. Not that you can't do it when you have cause to investigate. We're going to preemptively block you from using technology in various ways. Imagine if a 3D printer says, I want to print this, but no, there's a copyright on it. Or I want to print this, but no, it's patented. Well, people disagree about copyrights and patents all the time, but the fact that you can't print it is a preemptive strike against our freedom. So be very careful when people come bearing fruit, saying we need to stop this sharing information. We need to stop printing stuff, right? We need to stop being able to create things that might be dangerous. Be very wary of this because it's a very dangerous and slippery slope. Okay, I will stop here and I'll save the rest of the time for my dear friend Charlie, and we will come back to this later. Thank you all so much. Thank you.
Very nicely done. I really don't know where to start. Yes, I do. Who am I? Fortunately, I'm a mixed marriage. My wife is a graduate of UCLA. I'm a graduate of USC. I like to tell people I lifted her up. She tells people I bought my degree, she earned hers. I went to a little place down the road here, Loyola Law School. Back then I graduated in '72. Unfortunately, the bar exam was a singular experience for me, and I have practiced since in roughly 40 years now as a sole practitioner. So here I am. I am currently the president of the Orange County Brady Campaign to Prevent Gun Violence, and Suzanne Verge, Suzanne waved to these wonderful folks. Suzanne is president of our West Los Angeles chapter, and we have 25 chapters throughout the state, and we work very diligently to make things safer for everybody who is here and for everybody in our state.
Charles, for some of our guests here who may not know the genesis of the Brady campaign, maybe you could tell like 1 minute of where it got its name and where it came from.
James Brady was press secretary for then President Reagan, and unfortunately he was shot during an assassination attempt, and he just passed away a couple of months ago. Bless his heart. And his wife Sarah still is in charge of and is focused on this. And their concept, which is our concept, is a public health approach to preventing violence, specifically gun violence, which allows us not only to talk about criminal situation, but it allows us to talk about suicides. And quite frankly, there is no such thing as an accidental shooting. It's negligent, and it's unintentional, and it's preventable. And I get really upset with prosecutors and people in the Fourth Estate who want to keep calling it accidents. No such animal. Anyway, that's who I am. I am an attorney. However, when I do nonprofit work like this, nothing in my office is involved with this. I do estate planning and trusts in my office in South Orange County. And it was really wonderful driving through all that traffic to get here this morning. So, how did I get involved? My oldest, Matthew, between his junior and senior year in college, was back in New York for our summer job. Matthew was an undefeated league high school wrestling champion who loved to play the guitar. He loved magic tricks, really, and got something called a perfect partial differential equations final in his junior year for his honors class in math. And he used to call us on Sunday nights, and we would always end up by saying, "Love you lots," and he was having the time of his life. And then one morning about 3 a.m., we got a call from a New York detective, and this is 1994. 4 short sentences. Your son was the victim of a robbery. He did not offer resistance. He was shot. He is dead. And that was my introduction. So for 20 years, and in fact, until the day I die, I will work on having other families not have to walk in our shoes. And that's why I'm here today, because your minds are so keen and your interest is so wonderful that you will be able to carry on. And I appreciate you being here. So I did bring some handouts. I've learned in the long run, a good salesperson allows you to take something away from it. So for those of you who are in con law or about ready to take con law, this is an excellent summary of the Heller and McDonald decisions. I went back to my old con law book from the late 60s. Not a single syllable about the Second Amendment. Everything was the Commerce Clause and civil rights and desegregation. And if you could tell me that our founding fathers thought the Commerce Clause would be used to desegregate schools, wow. Okay. So, and as Josh was alluding to, there are 2 key points in this handout in my mind. The court did say that the Second Amendment does not protect a right to keep and carry any weapon whatsoever in any manner whatsoever and for whatsoever purpose. And they did limit their ruling to a handgun in your home for the purpose of self-defense. It also tells us, the court noted, the Second Amendment is consistent with laws that ban dangerous and unusual weapons, and I would submit to you that a 3D gun is a dangerous and unusual weapon. So, where do we go from here? California is unique, and I would like to, and what see, Josh, you got PowerPoint. I'm old-fashioned.
I have no visuals. None.
You're doing this without a net, is what you're saying?
I love it.
No hands.
Okay, no hands.
Wireless.
These are some of the key cases or key bills that we've signed into law in California. And why this is important is over the last 20 years, our gun mortality rate in California has gone down 52%, which the reason it's significant for us is that's 24% greater than the national average. So when people talk to me about prevention and feel good and show me, yes, which brings me to this particular handout, which shows me what we are doing here in California does work. We have the strongest gun laws in the country, and I'm very proud of it. Now, what are some of the things we have done here? Well, we said that we have universal background checks in California, which is amazing because 90% of the US wants them, 80% of our NRA membership wants them, and the leadership that's been hijacked by the gun manufacturers would not let a vote come to the floor of the House. And I'm just really unhappy about that because we need votes, because we need to have people pinned down to how they did vote so we can come election time have them explain themselves.
So just by way of background, right now there exists a mechanism through which when parties transfer weapons, they can do, in California, it has to go through a dealer. So if I wanted to sell a firearm to Josh, we would actually go to a gun dealer. The gun dealer would take possession of the gun They would run a background check on me, make sure I'm eligible to purchase the gun. They hold the gun for 10 days, and then Josh could pick the gun up. So there's a background check. That doesn't exist in all states, and there are some states, I don't know how many.
Well, the problem is we border Nevada and Arizona.
Right, where private parties are exempted from that. So if two private parties go at a gun show or anywhere else, they can transfer the gun between them without any type of background.
Oh no, there's an instant background check.
I'll use Arizona for an example. In Arizona,
shows.
private parties are not required to go through that.
They're not, right, yes.
And not at gun shows either.
The background check is certainly available.
Columbine. That was the issue with the Columbine slaughter.
So I think that's one of the things that Charles was referring to.
And we have a law in California that allows you to buy one handgun a month. I think 12 a year is plenty, but we were finding that people were buying a massive number of the same type of gun, and that in fact they were then putting them in the trunk and taking it out for illegal sales. So we've addressed that. We have safety standards in California. And that's interesting because the National Consumer Safety Board, the one area that they cannot regulate, the one area they're exempted from, is a consumer product that was created to maim and to kill. Yet we can monitor and moderate lethal teddy bear and so on, but not guns. But in California, we do have a safety test, and our DOJ has a list of over 1,100 weapons that have passed that test that are available for purchase and manufacture in our state. So I'm very proud of the laws we've created. I'm very proud of how we're cutting into the mortality rate. And interesting discussion I had with the professor, with from the district, the DOJ's office, Attorney General's office, about a bill I'm very proud of that we just passed last year, the Gun Violence Restraining Order, where I'm convinced if we had this in place, we would not have had the Santa Barbara massacre. If a person is in crisis and they're a danger to themselves or others, we have the ability to petition the court for a 21-day restraining order that will remove that gun from their possession, and it'll become effective January 1, 2016. I wish we had had it, and we could have saved some lives in Santa Barbara. So that's where we're coming from. Those are the 20 years that I've been involved with, the safety tests, saving lives. And I'll stop there because I would then go on to ghost guns and freedom of speech and the First and Second Amendment that I think you would like to talk a little bit more about.
Well, let's talk a little bit about ghost guns. So in California, when we use the term ghost gun, what we are referring to is a gun that is made by an individual that does not have a serial number. So there are a lot of ways you can do this. We're going to talk about 3D printed guns, but for example, you can presently purchase a receiver for a firearm that isn't quite complete. Take that receiver and complete the work on it yourself. They're called 80% lowers. And you buy the receiver with about 80% of the work done. You do the remaining 20% yourself. All the rest of the components that go onto the gun are unregulated. The receiver, for all intents and purposes, is the gun. Without a receiver, you can't have a gun. The receiver is what's regulated. So anyone in this room could buy every part to build a rifle or a handgun, less the receiver, with no background checks, it's just cash on delivery. So
and the shooter, the Santa Monica shooter, where 5 people were killed, he was not legally eligible to buy guns, but he was able to purchase online that receiver and put together his own gun, and 5 people on that Santa Monica campus died because of that.
So when you hear the term ghost gun, that's what it's simply referring to, an unserialized receiver. So the first question I would pose to the panel is, using current technology, and please remember that 3D printing technology is really a developing technology right now. I mean, what it was a year ago is completely different from what it is today and what it's probably going to be a year from now. So using current technology, do you feel that it exists where someone could download the data and completely print from the receiver, trigger, hammer, barrel, sights, everything, a 3D plastic gun?
Yes.
Well, the answer is yes, but the better answer is why. 3D guns aren't very good. They're very brittle, they break apart, and they're extremely expensive to print. The technology itself costs several $1,000s. If I was interested in getting a lethal weapon, I would very much rather buy something ready-made or an 80%. 3D printing is not the ideal or even optimal way of getting such a weapon. So the answer is yes, but it would not be a very good idea to do so.
I'd like to add to that, if I may. Quite frankly, we're not talking about some of the folks out there that are the brightest bulb on the tree.
Well,
Okay, now, but there's a little more that goes into that. When we talk about 3D printing, we're talking about, as we tend, no background checks. It's undetectable because there's no metal. It's untraceable because there's no
they're
serial.
bullets.
It's untraceable because
Yeah.
there's no serial. And yes, I agree with you, there's a poor quality. But let's go back and look at the First Amendment also. We look at something called place and manner. And Justice Frankfurter told us that we have a question, how to reconcile the free expression of ideas with the protection of the public peace. And when we do that, we can't just broad brush and say we're on a slippery slope. We do live in a society, we do interact with each other, and we have to come to some form of an understanding there. Now, I have not looked at a con law book in 45 years, but I do remember a case about it being illegal to cry fire in a crowded theater when there is none. And we're talking about imminent. And if we're talking about imminent, how about in your home state, Josh, where somebody called Come and Take It, created these types of guns on the steps of the Capitol, and we're handing them out? And more importantly, what question do we have? Is creating a 3D gun a manufacture? And if it's a manufacturer, then we have plenty of laws in place in California that will prohibit and ban and prosecute that person. So it's an interesting question.
So is a 3D gun truly invisible to, let's say, an X-ray or a metal detector, or does it necessarily contain a component that might be detectable?
Yes, a bullet, right? So I mean, the entire issue of undetectable guns is silly because you need ammunition, right? A gun without ammo is not very effective. More so, there have been plastic guns for 20 years that are undetectable. We have a federal law called the Undetectable Firearms Act, which says all guns need to have a certain amount of metal in it to trigger a metal detector. You can avoid that if you wish, and of course, you can break lots of laws, but you still need bullets to fire it. With respect to the First Amendment, the shouting fire theory, that wasn't a dissent by Justice Holmes. That's not even the correct test. But I think the better test that the court has held is that you need a presumption, right? The burden is on the government to limit liberty, not the other way around, right? There are lots of reasons. Why would anyone need 12 guns a month, 12 guns a year? That's an entirely wrong question to ask. The question is, why should the government be able to limit that right? With respect to fundamental rights, the burden's on the state, not the individual. And to the extent that we're limiting speech and guns, that's the correct question I think we should be asking.
Do you think it's possible for a state or a municipality or some other local agency to enact a ban of these type of weapons that would comport with Heller and McDonald? And Charles, I'm going to let you go first this time.
That reminds me of a word called preemption, where does that particular government agency occupy the field? I remember there was because that's the fight we had back in the 90s when we went after Saturday night specials. And it took us 5 years to finally create that safety test, which is amazing. Bottom line is, in California, the safety test is a drop test, which in my way of mind, if you buy a gun, it shouldn't fire when you drop it.
Yeah,
and a firing test. And the bottom line is that we were able to do that. So
in California, there is an approved handguns roster, and manufacturers have to submit a number of the firearms they wish to sell in California for destructive testing. Includes what Charles talked about, and they're only while the gun is on the safe handgun roster may it be sold in California. So okay.
So being an old man,
right.
I forgot my train of thought.
No, I was just asking about the preemption question.
Oh, all right.
Could California, for example, pass?
I believe we have that ability, and the way we were able to get the safety tests is we ended up with over 50 councils, different cities passing their own ordinances. So it just was a mushroom from the bottom up and the grassroots, which is the essence of our democracy, is grassroots.
Well, let's be very precise when you say banning 3D printed guns. What exactly are you banning? The sharing the information or the printing of them, right? If we're talking about the printing of them, I mean, of course, a state can regulate it, but there's no way of finding them because they're printed locally. But more importantly, if you're talking about banning the sharing information about it, then you cannot do it as a state because that's a national and wide thing. So the actual act of regulating is to be very precise. If you're saying once you print a 3D gun, can it be banned? Well, sure, right? But I'm not sure what the regulation would even look like.
All right. Well, is it even possible? I mean, we have anonymous file sharing, and once this is on the internet, it's on the internet. Is it even possible at this point to regulate the actual files?
Probably not, and I wish we could have. I wonder how many people in this room remember the name Timothy McVeigh.
I wish we couldn't, because the power to regulate files on the internet is a scary one. If you know the name, what's his name, Edward Snowden, right? The power to limit information on the internet is a lot scarier than what people can do with it. McVeigh could have used the Anarchist Cookbook. I would not be in favor of banning such a book to create bombs out of nitrates. That's a remedy too far for me.
All right. I'd like to open up some questions to people in the audience today. Do we have any questions for our panelists? Sir?
I'm pretty passionate about this topic just because I spent a lot of time on the internet. McVeigh thing, he was formerly in the military. That's one difference. But the guns itself, the question I think is always incorrect being asked on TV. I was anti-gun my whole life, but at this point it doesn't even matter. It's the question of sharing files online. To be honest, I get a photo back from the internet. Neither, defense distributed. The guns on the internet, I can get it on a torrent whenever I want. I can build it. I've done it. I've just for fun. I've seen how it's made, but I think it's really infringing on my right as a regular person. Don't you believe that the question is being asked incorrectly?
And that question is?
Either it's too dangerous or it's infringing. Don't you think there's another question that could be asked other than that? Whether we should be allowed to do whatever we want and we can't.
Well, I think when I look at the First and Second Amendments, I have to say to myself, are they absolute? And to that question, the answer is no. So if they're not absolute, I have to look at the circumstances that they exist today and how do we make it work within our society today. I think there's a major difference between a single-loaded musket. Oh, I am going to mention AK-47s. Josh, bless your heart. Okay, I believe there's a real difference between single-load muskets and AK-47s and the interpretation of the Second Amendment. I'm always fascinated, too. This audience should understand the concept of stare decisis. And in 1939, in the Miller case, we understood that a well-regulated militia was our National Guard. And for 60 years, we had circuit courts interpreting that as National Guard. And then in 2008 and 2010, our Supreme Court, 5 justices said, oh my goodness, all these years you've had the wrong definition. Now, what was also unique is they said, we're not going to go back through 60 years of cases. So even though you had the wrong definition, you came to the right decision, which I find fascinating. But we have to have a balance there. And that balance is a certain public safety, police power, and a balance. And I don't think you can just arbitrarily say, this is my right.
Let me answer your question in a totally different context, as intellectual property. Anyone IP study here? Anyone likes IP? Okay, so imagine one day you have a 3D printer, and this is in the future. And instead of printing a gun, you want to print a sneaker, a pair of Nike sneakers, right? There's nothing stopping you from printing a pair of Nike sneakers. Now, Nike's not going to be happy about this, because if you can print a pair of Nike sneakers, you don't need to wait in line all night to get them LeBrons. You don't have to do that, right? So what happens if the government tells HP or whatever manufacturer printer, we want you to install a filter, and we're going to give you a list of files you can't print. And 3D printing is not a precise art. If it's similar to a file that you can't print, it won't print. Right? Of course, if everyone wants to, they can hack the printer and print whatever they want. But think about this. The act of the government giving a company a list of things not to design, whether or not Nike's broad or not. Well, if you want to make something similar to a Nike shoe that's slightly different, right? The limiting of information in this context of 3D printing is very, very scary. And not just guns. In fact, I think guns is a good vehicle to discuss it because it's novel. But this is not where it's going to end. This is going to end in printing physical things which people use. This is where it will really come to play.
Yeah, another question.
And quite frankly, I'm a little mystified here when I keep hearing this word, the government. Like it's some nebulous thing out here and, up in the cloud or whatever. I'm very proud of the fact that I've registered and voted every single time I've been eligible. I am the government. I vote. And I remember looking at a video where a gal was in the northern Michigan militia, and she was holding a cartridge box of bullets, and she says, God bless the government. They give us the ballot box, then they give us the jury box, and finally they give us the cartridge box. Now that to me is scary.
I think Abraham Lincoln said that.
We have another question right over here. Right over here.
Thank you.
We should not go through that to understand the crazy situation that we are in. we don't need to lose our loved one to know that. And I'm talking about this from a physician point of view. I'm a physician, and it is absolutely a public health care issue. When a physician in Brigham and Women's Hospital gets shot because the patient family is upset about, the care. I mean, the person is going through emotion, shouldn't have access to gun. When 20 first grader gets shot in Sandy Hook, how could we just say this is my absolute right to have anything in it? Do we have absolute right to have child pornography? If we don't have that, how could we have absolute right to print guns and then go and kill kids? How is that different? I mean,
Well, let's
and I want to just add one thing from one of the fathers of one of the Sandy Hook's kids, who said, founding fathers put life, liberty, and pursuit of happiness in that order. Somebody's right to freedom, liberty, cannot infringe into my or my loved one rights to life. And that's the crisis that we are right now. And I would like to hear.
Josh?
Well, I'm not here. By the way, it was Frederick Douglass. I was close. So Frederick Douglass in 1867 said, a man's rights rest in 3 boxes: the ballot box, the jury box, the cartridge box. Let no man be careful in the ballot box because of the color. No, this is a quote. So Frederick Douglass is important because how did wasn't the first gun control laws? So this can blow your mind. Which was the first state to enact gun control laws? South Carolina. Do you know why? To disarm blacks. One of the key aspects of Jim Crow is gun control, take guns away from blacks and slaves. This is actually a serious history. This is where gun control laws emerged. So while I pivot from that, and by the way, I'm really sorry for your loss. It's a very touching, and I don't like, my area of expertise is not the policy, and I don't have a very strong response when you see tragedies of children being shot. I mean, this is something which no one ever wants to see, and there's not a very good response to this. My only response, and which is in no way to justify it, is that these things are strikingly rare. If you look at the incidence of this, the level has remained roughly the same over the last 5 decades. And if you research this, yes, all these numbers have been increasing, they're simply not. So to the extent that we have these tragedies, they occur, and they're terrible. And the people who do them break lots of laws to get there. And they jump over lots of hoops to get there. And they're sick people who take lots of steps to kill and inflict carnage, right? This is not, of course, a license to allow people to have whatever they want. And I'm not arguing for that. I also support background checks. I would support universal background checks. I do. I support a lot of gun control laws. But the certain sorts...
And actually
Oh,
control...
Charles, I'm almost done. Yeah, so I support lots of rules. I support lots of regulations. And I'm fully in favor of lots. But in my mind, I always start from the presumption that you have a constitutional right. And the burden's on the government to explain why a regulation should exist.
Sure.
And that's where I start from. And if there is, in fact, a regulation that will help promote public safety, not unduly burden liberty, right, where the focus on what the right is, then we can have that debate. And I'm sure there are a lot of things on Charlie's list that I would agree with. Some of them we probably don't. But with respect to the topic of discussion today, a handgun, which is the quintessential constitutional right, I think it's a very tough order to ban that.
And it really shouldn't even be a debate. When you couch the terms in right versus control, I lose before I even open my mouth. Nobody likes to be controlled. I'm a lifelong Republican. I was a member of the Lincoln Club of Orange County in the 90s down there, which is probably currently would have been called the John Birch Society. So, I understand Federalist Society and so on. I appreciate that. But the discussion should be responsible gun policies, not right versus control. And as was stated, my family does have the right to life, liberty, and the pursuit of happiness also. And my 21-year-old was cut short. And that's just plain wrong. And that's a burden that every single day I carry with me. The other thing, the problem with this is that every 10 hours, a young person with a gun commits suicide. Because we have some people out there who think they have this right to have a loaded, unlocked gun in their bedstand because when that burglar allegedly puts a pinky through the window, they can shoot it off. And that just doesn't make a lot of sense either. I mean, we have to have a discourse where we have some reasonable compromise, where we can talk about expression of ideas, but also protection of the public peace.
Let me get to a question back here in the corner. You had your hand up.
Not to value points that she made, or to remove any kind of sentiment from the topic, but what I've seen brought up by both you and her, the ultimate source that I'm seeing is really not a gun issue or a regulation on guns. It's really like a mental health issue. That's not even this discussion right now. But most of those crimes that are committed with people who break very strong regulated gun laws, most of the time they have mental health issues that are not highlighted when we look at those problems, even in the media or even legally. But in general, it's like you mentioned, every 10 hours someone commits suicide using a gun.
Mm-hmm.
We could address the fact that they're just committing suicide. I don't think it's the gun really. It could be in any shape or form that could come to fruition.
Is one of the arguments of the Brady campaign that the 3D printing technology will make those types of weapons more accessible and therefore more people might commit suicide? Is that?
I'm not sure they've taken a position in that area. However, if I may, I've been on a number of panels with physicians, and I was introduced to a concept called the glow minute. And I said, well, my goodness, what is that? And that's when someone attempts a suicide, slashing wrists, popping pills. They understand what a stupid thing they've done, and they do want to live, and they do make the 911 call. And there is help, there is training, and they go on to become very productive. When there's a loaded, unlocked gun available to them, which normally happens in the home, quite frankly, and they use that as their weapon of choice, they're going to be 98% successful. No 911 call, a lot of angry and confused people, and a very, very dead young person. So no, it is a multifaceted situation, yes. But it's like curing malaria. I mean, we had to talk about a drug to address the malaria. We had to talk about the stagnant water, et cetera, but at some point in that discussion, we did have to get around to looking at the mosquito. And if we're going to prevent gun deaths, at some point in time, we have to look at the gun.
I had a question over here.
Hi, thanks again for coming to our campus and sharing your insight. And my main question / concern was that I'm having difficulty understanding your comparison to printing Nike shoes to wear outside because they look good, you like the way that they look on your feet, versus printing a device that could cause harm. And although the Supreme Court, they said that, it's imminent harm in the design, that is an issue as far as intellectual property goes. There isn't an issue, I guess. Well, it is, I believe, personally. But I think that it's kind of difficult to compare it in such a way that, it's just an intellectual property issue. It's just about design. Can you copy design? And can you filter a printer to print certain things and not? Because I think there needs to be more regulation as far as...
It's actually the opposite. A constitutional right is protected more than Nike sneakers, right? You don't have the right to Nike sneakers. You have the right to a gun. It's actually the exact opposite.
But I don't understand that comparison as far as...
Well, you have a constitutional right to a gun. You may not like this, but the Supreme Court so held, and until you get another justice, that's the Supreme Court's ruling. And if you have the right to a gun, that can be regulated even less than sneakers, right? That's why it's not surprising there are a lot of carve-outs to federal law for guns because there's such a constitutional right. I mean, you have this privilege. This exists. And whether or not you like it, this is our constitutional law. Charlie?
I appreciate what you're saying, and it's difficult to make the equation between a consumer product that can maim and kill versus something that is basically just aesthetic or comfortable. And I thank you, that's a good point, but technically I have to agree with Josh.
And is there any steps we've taken, I might have missed this, to regulate ghost guns at this point in general?
I can speak to that a little bit. The legislature in California in the last term passed a bill that would have required the registration of existing unserialized weapons, and it would have prohibited people in California from manufacturing new unserialized weapons. It passed through both houses of the legislature, and Governor Brown vetoed that bill with a very brief veto message. I don't remember exactly what it said, but it essentially said that this wouldn't help. This law wouldn't do anything to help. So there have been legislative efforts. It was vetoed recently.
Our governor has been consistently inconsistent on his gun policy, and we will have 4 more years of being consistently inconsistent.
We have someone who's been very patiently waiting to ask a question. Thank you.
Thank you. I came here to this talk primarily for the First Amendment issue with 3D printing. I work with 3D printers a lot. I have one, a commercial one in my house, my business, all of that. And so what really touches me is the issue of being able to share information. And so one of the ways to ban these guns would be to stop the sharing of the information. But that terrifies me. I don't want that. But I do want more safety.
As somebody in that business, though, is it possible at this point? I mean, if you could wave a magic wand and no one could ever create another file again for these, they're out there already.
That's not how we go forward making our policies.
Right.
I mean, people want to murder, they're going to murder. That doesn't mean we're all of a sudden going to make murder legal. So it's this fear of hampering the First Amendment that brought me here. I want to know what else we can do to regulate this gun industry that doesn't control the First Amendment issue, but works elsewhere.
So I think the interesting aspect, and your point is exactly right. But as a side note, Pirates Bay and others block 3D guns, right? So you actually had what's called Thingiverse. What's that thing called?
Yeah.
Thingiverse. There have been private entities that said we don't want to put guns in our service, but torrents have them. You can get them somewhere. So the effective issue is a 3D printing, and I don't mean to compare sneakers to guns, but the IP issue is the same. Is once something's on the internet, you can't control it. Rihanna's picture, whatever it is, right? Once you have a picture in the net, you can't control it. At that point, the only way to stop it is to prevent its construction, which is why I raised the point of the government putting filters into 3D printers. This is not a joke. There are serious manufacturers in the entertainment industry and otherwise who want to put DRM, which is digital rights management, into 3D printers. The same way your iPod would not play a file that you download on Napster back in the day, people want to make printers not be able to print certain things. That scares the living daylights out of me, right? Same for sharing files. It scares me to have internet filters that block stuff. So at that point, the only way you could ban this is actually banning the actual point of possession, actually having a 3D printed gun. And Congress has passed the Undetectable Firearms Act, which says you cannot have an entirely plastic gun. That's already illegal under the federal law. So there's actually a law.
For those of you who want to read it, it's 18 U.S.C. Section 922, and it requires 3.7 ounces of steel in any firearm, and it's illegal to import, sell, ship, deliver, possess, transfer, receive any firearm that's not detectable by walk-through metal detection, or it doesn't look like what it's supposed to look like on an X-ray scanner. So that law does exist.
And it was renewed for
Yes,
10 years.
it was renewed.
It was renewed for 10 years. However, they didn't
I was
modify
puzzled
it.
by the possession, the home possession part.
They didn't modify it to specifically address 3D guns.
No, they didn't. They turned coward on us.
Right.
Well,
So
It doesn't target
it doesn't target them.
They couldn't have. So actually, the history is this: Chuck Schumer started freaking out when this happened, and Schumer was pushing a bill. The problem was it probably was unconstitutional, and there were not nearly enough votes to put through, so it died.
Question in the right here.
For just 2 seconds, I wouldn't address Senator Schumer as freaking out on anything. I think
Never.
he's a very intellectual, very thoughtful person, and I appreciate his point of view.
Question in the front row and then in the back.
Okay, so I'm glad that this kind of discussion has kind of, I think, put in the open these kind of 3 rights in my view. So we have kind of the First Amendment issue of information, that right, and then there's the right to life, which I think is also important and kind of establishes people living in peace in a community. And then there's another right, which is this privacy right, and kind of some people touched on that private entity. And I think that's kind of where the gun that is undetectable, theoretically, really kind of poses this new right, I think, of what about my private right? Say I have my house, somebody wants to enter my house, but with a gun. But now it's my home that's in question. And it really seems to be then beyond that, like even if there is law enforcement, even if there are all these laws, it really seems to be based on this kind of good faith almost, is really somebody has a skeletal gun. I have my house, they come to my house. I have to trust them, they have to trust me, kind of. I just feel like it's very interesting that these rights are conflicting, but then again, in order for it all to work, there also has to be this kind of mutual trust among people.
I think for the most part, our society is built on that kind of trust. We give people lots of dangerous objects. We give people a car. We hope people don't drive into buildings, right? We give people pilot's license. We hope they don't fly into buildings. I mean, there's of course people. They're gonna be, and I don't need to make, I don't need to make light of it. If someone wants to break into your house, you don't have metal detectors. I don't know. I mean,
some private entities do though.
right, and then there's a federal law to prevent this. So I mean, at a certain point, we do trust our fellow citizens not to do dangerous things. And thankfully, our society, I mean, Charlie has statistics. We have, most people are law-abiding. Most people do.
It's interesting how our social norms have evolved too, because I think that's partly what you're saying. At what point in our illustrious career, we decided that dueling was an appropriate way to settle something. Dueling. You know, and we don't allow dueling
Are you
anymore.
saying that Brady campaign has a problem with dueling?
I definitely think they do.
Okay.
Yes, I do.
You're going to go out on a limb. You're going to go out on a
I
limb
can
on
go
that
out
one.
on, I can go on record with that one.
Very
Yes, I
well.
can.
Very well. We have a question in the back.
Kind of like a more of a common question, but what I'm gathering here, what I really agree with, and that really scares me also, is that they're going to use the development of 3D guns and the 3D printer in order to amass an ability to take away everybody else's like IP rights.
Yes.
Other things you can build through 3D printing. I just recently saw in person a 3D printed car that a private entity, a billionaire, printed on his own, and now he has his own car. So now he can pretty much build his own car brand, and he doesn't have to go to anybody's. Ask anybody's.
Let me ask a question here. Let's take the word gun out of this discussion, because one of the questions, someone over here was saying, hey, it's different because we're talking about something that's designed to maim and kill. I want to take the word gun out of this discussion, and I want to put the word hammer in its place, because a hammer, you know, improperly or properly used, depending on your point of view, can maim and kill. Is there anyone here who feels the same about banning or regulating or modifying the sharing of information to build a 3D hammer as they do about a 3D gun? Yes.
It's all the same. It's all a matter. It's
No.
once what you do with
It's
the
not.
actual product or being able to create the product that's different. It's not the actual information.
Sir?
I think that as far as the hammer goes, it's a useful item that I could see if you live far away from the city, you don't have to use the gas to drive to the city to go buy a hammer. And
Let me play devil's advocate. If I live in rural Kentucky and I hunt and I use that weapon to put food on my family's table, that's a useful item that I don't have to drive into the city to buy food.
right, no, and I think that's where the question kind of lies, because I think the whole copyright issue with 3D printers is it's trying to protect people who have these type of property rights in the products so that it doesn't get out in anybody's hands. Because if it's cheaper to print it rather than go buy DeWalt or whatever from Walmart, I think people, that's where some of the.
Let me take you and then you.
Two things. If I could know for certain that we ban 3D printed guns and it will have no effects on any kind of sharing in the future, I would. But here, I don't have that guarantee. And the other thing about the gun is that unfortunately, I don't think you can take that out of the equation, is the ease in which you can harm another person.
Okay, let's get rid of hammer. Let's say 3D printed sword, which was the weapon of choice for 1,000 years. Right? I mean, is it the same discussion? Is it the same discussion, or
No.
are we? So,
It can't be the same discussion.
and why not?
Because you're talking about a specific product, a design that's there. Its purpose is to maim and kill. A hammer's purpose is not to
What
maim
about a
and kill.
sword?
I don't see a sword being that. I don't hear about drive-by sword slayings. I hear about drive-by shooting.
You've never been to medieval times, obviously.
So in the back.
If I may, there's a certain
Okay.
concept called Baptists and bootleggers. Anyone hear of Baptists and bootleggers? What's Baptists and bootleggers?
I just heard of it.
Okay, so during Prohibition, who are the two groups that love to ban alcohol? The Baptists, because they thought it was sinful, and the bootleggers, because they could sell for more, right? So in any situation, you have people who got rid of things. So in this room, we have Baptists and bootleggers, right? We have some people who want to get rid of guns because they don't like gun deaths, and you have the bootleggers, people in Hollywood, who want to get rid of this 3D printing because it'll harm their IP interests. So you're going to see the media industry hijack this debate, push through all these laws regarding 3D printing under the guise of gun control. This is actually about IP more so. And this actually, if we can talk about this afterwards, the IP issues here are a lot stronger than the gun issues, as far as whatever legislation will come through.
And I don't believe in getting rid of guns. I believe in getting rid of preventable gun deaths. That's the key here.
We are running out of time, so I want to get a couple more questions. I want to give our panelists a few moments to wrap up. So we had.
Well, I don't know.
I'm done. I'm done.
All right.
I'm done. All right.
Yeah.
Charlie and I, we've done it all.
They picked our brains.
We've done it all. Let's get a couple more questions.
I just want to address the hammer issue. I think if I knew that I was.
If you had a hammer, you'd.
If I had a hammer.
Sorry.
Peter, Paul, and Mary.
Yeah,
All right. Now you're in my era.
If I knew that I was infringing like a patent or a copyright while I was printing that hammer, I would have an issue with it just
Okay.
because I'm into IP. But I think there needs to be more legislation when it comes to guns, because for the purpose of it.
So are you saying that if I use my 3D printer to print a Glock Model 19, there's an IP issue there because that's something that somebody else owns. But if I come up with the Tim Weiner Model 19 that's different somehow, you have less problem with that?
Is it fair use? I don't know.
I'm just asking. I mean,
Yes,
I think
yes,
that's,
the
I think that's a very fair point.
The Liberator gun that was posted online is an open source gun. It is actually open source. There's no copyright or patent on it. That was done deliberately.
Any other quick questions? Oh, right here? No? In the back, one more question?
I was gonna say that's what I wanted to do at the end of what I was trying to say, is I want to remove the word gun from it completely, because what we're really talking about is IP law right now, and what I feel like they're gonna do is they always play off people's emotions and they mask really big issues that people can't really swallow and understand, the whole. To sit down and explain IP law to anybody who's even been in law school sometimes is difficult. To explain to anybody who's heard of IP law before, I worked in IP law firm.
What's if?
I feel
I don't know.
I might have just one little bit of pinch of salt more than maybe the person next to me, but even more so, I still don't know that much. And I feel like they're gonna use the ability to work on people's emotions, work on the fact that it's so dangerous and having a gun in the home. If someone wants a gun, you can go and build a gun. I knew someone who does gun dealers, he could build a gun.
Home Depot. All right, I think
I
we have time for one more question.
We have time for one more question, and I want to give our panelists just 1 minute to wrap up, and then we'll.
Yes, sir.
You mentioned hammer and sword. Is there a concern that by treating these laws as vaccines almost for the gun sicknesses, let's just say, that weapons can advance to be more harmful types of weaponry? Because a gun is a primitive weapon, but if you're talking really harmful weapons, there are invisible weapons out there, such as chemical weapons and biological weapons.
Yeah.
Is there a concern?
Actually, 3D printing germ warfare is a serious issue. If you actually study this, you can actually 3D print genes and germs and anthrax. This is not a joke. If you want to learn about 3D printing, measles, you guys are in California, vaccinate your children, but please, California, please, for the love of God. That's a public safety health issue, which Charlie and I could probably agree on entirely. But you can actually 3D print diseases, right? This is legit, right? This is much worse than guns.
So my question is there a concern that by limiting primitive types of weapons where you can actually see and protect yourself, let's just say in the best case scenario, from a weapon, that by enacting anti-gun laws, you're actually promoting people to do
if you want to launch an anthrax attack in the subway, you're going to do it. I don't know.
No, you're talking of also in the world of prevention. And I know that the people who deal with guns don't like the analogy when we talk about cars. But we have airbags now. We have highways that are designed much better than they were in the past. And we've shown statistically that these advances save lives. And when I'm talking about the gun issue, I'm talking about preventing harm, preventing injury, and saving lives. That's my focus. That's my end.
Charlie, do you want?
No, that's my
Josh,
wind-up.
anything?
I'm done. Thank you all so much.
I want to thank the ACS and the Federal Society for hosting this event and our panelists.